Alright, hell yeah. Today's session was a success, and what we're going to go over is cockpit outfitting. So this would be what I consider an R1 cockpit. Basically just something to put your hip against. And we're going to talk about how we do get a little bit of stability here. Like, nothing has to be sticking out over the boat. You could literally just have the two nubbins that are that height pushing against your hip. But we're going to see that we can still do some bracing. Hell yeah. Alright, this is your stable position. It's not too much angle, but hell yeah, we get a little bit of lean. And this can be really effective maybe for edging and surfing and high siding. Hell yeah. So this is where I show kind of where I do get some buoyancy, but how basically what you want is, what I'm showing is, like, if I had a flat surface that was right there, that was totally flat, you know what I mean, that was actually rigid with the boat, it would keep the boat from, going past that angle. And that's about the angle that you can handle when bracing. If it goes past that, it's just past the point of no return. Alright, so this week's been a success because we showed this concept where if I have a perfect sphere, it's just going to roll in the water. But if I have one bump out, that's going to progressively add buoyancy and have a resistive force. Now I can have a second bump out, and this is kind of what my cockpit is doing. It does have a second bump out. And this week's bracing and the cockpit design, but it just has this. Once it goes kind of past here, this will go totally flat, and then the whole thing, the whole boat goes vertical too easily because it wants to rest now on this new flat surface, and therefore your boat's vertical. So if this is the angle that I want my boat, what I need is a second bump out. Now this has to be kind of rigidly attached. Here's a better color photo. So hell yeah, if I had this rigidly attached, then I can control the angle. And what I'm thinking is there's no reason why you couldn't be able to just lay out onto something and then, you know what I mean, bracing is kind of a thing of the past. You're more just high-siding your boat, because that's the one thing that I want to be able to effectively do is to not rely on a paddle stroke, but just body position alone. Drive into this buoyancy, high side my boat up against a wave. That's going to be more practical than doing kind of, bracing with the paddle. But hell yeah, I think it can be accomplished just with having this outrigger, because then you can control how far this goes vertical. Hell yeah. Alright, so with this cockpit design, paddling is not compromised, you know what I mean? Potentially not too much of that buoyancy goes in the water, and if it does, it's only going to provide a resistive force. But basically, this is something that you can attach to the top of your boat, like right away, you know what I mean? Something to push your hip against, and I think that will be great for advanced R1 boaters and anyone just trying to get into it, because leaning on that hip, that is one of the hardest things to get used to with R1 paddling. Alright, one of the big improvements to have a cockpit is what I call just the boof stroke. You know what I mean? Even if you're not going to boof like this over a drop, because you might go vertical and tip over. It's a very effective stroke, and it simulates like a ear dip, you know what I mean? Like in a kayaking, with kayaking terms, leaning to the side, taking a boof stroke. And I'm trying to just get back to, do this stroke and get back to flat. Now, I don't have any footage of me actually using this, but see how that boat turns so much? And you actually keep momentum. So I'll make a separate video that you can use this boof stroke. Even if you don't do it, so dynamically, you can do a mini boof, and that'll help you turn the harder direction. Turning the direction of this stroke is the harder direction to turn and keep momentum. It's easy to turn, but you'll just spin out. So keeping momentum that direction with this small boof stroke, I'll make a video on that. So, hell yeah. Alright, hell yeah. So this slow motion clip is going to show me just totally tip over. So once that surface goes flat, it's so vertical that it just wants to totally tip. But what I'm going to talk about here is that even just having that much of a bump out, once the boat's upside down, it's actually easier to flip back over. So even like a cockpit made out of foam right there, once the boat's upside down, it's going to kind of act as a teeter-totter effect. And when you're just grabbing drain holes, it's going to make it tip right back side a lot easier. But this just shows that if you actually wanted stability, you would actually have to have kind of like a ledge another bump out to keep that angle from going vertical. And then if you have complicated stuff like that, who knows if the boat's going to be easier to turn back over. Hell yeah. Alright, so currently this is about the limit of lean, but it's kind of interesting. Like, the extra buoyancy in the water isn't that big of a deal. It's more just being able to brace your hip against and maybe being able to leverage your body back in. And so the next thing that I actually want to take to the lake is to put a legitimate, perpendicular bump out that can actually lay flat, and maybe I can just lay my body against it. But if you have that, it might get into the way of the actual paddle stroke, so we'll see. Hell yeah, this seemed to be the easiest brace, to actually just stab my head into the water and then do a high brace. Using the paddle stroke to actually dive my hands down, keeping the paddle on the surface, or just pushing down with the paddle and pushing down and pulling towards me so I can actually get my weight back in the boat. A lot of these bracing techniques are just like, hey, use your paddle stroke, but then the only way you're going to keep the boat is get your weight back in. And this is where I show even that cockpit allows me to stay within the boat. And sometimes that's useful because now I can lean outside the boat, but my hips are inside. Alright, that's the video, but we are going to end with how might you actually attach a cockpit. So what I did is I had these foam pads and then poked a hole with my river knife at an elevation. So then when you strap it, then a piece of it can be sticking up and out. So I can strap it to the tube, but I wouldn't strap it all the way around the tube. You would want maybe, if you got techie, you would maybe glue 4 D-rings, pretty small, but then just have the strap. So you want it rigid, but you also want it clean line where nothing can get, caught in there. Hell yeah. Alright, thanks for joining me. Booyah.